including Miya Rudd's parents on Wednesday. Just today, we were given those indictments from the Kentucky Court of Justice.
Miya Rudd's mother, Tesla Tucker, her father, Cage Rudd, her grandfather, Ricky Smith, and a fourth man, Brody Payne, were all originally indicted back in June on several drug trafficking, drug possession, and firearm charges.
When they unzipped the duffel bag, the room went quiet. Even the officers, seasoned by years of complex investigations and intense operations, stepped back in disbelief. What they found wasn't just evidence. It was something no one had expected. There was no missing poster, no Amber Alert, no public plea from the front porch. For weeks, no one beyond the family even realized that an 8-month-old baby girl had disappeared from a quiet home in rural Kentucky. She didn't slip away in the dark. She didn't wander off. She was out of sight, in the one place no one had thought to check, inside the home where she once giggled and reached for her bottle. The house was quiet. The neighborhood asked no questions. And the system meant to protect her, it overlooked every sign that something was wrong. By the time authorities began piecing things together, they weren't searching for someone who had wandered off. They were trying to make sense of how it had gone unnoticed for so long. What followed revealed one of the most severe breakdowns in protective oversight Kentucky had ever seen. This story isn't just about one case. It's about silence, missed chances, and the consequences of looking the other way. Before we begin, please note, this story involves sensitive subject matter that may be uncomfortable for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. To our returning subscribers, thank you. Your support, your shares, and your comments help bring light to stories that matter and drive change. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. We're glad you've joined us. Miya Rudd was born on October 12, 2023, in Owensboro, Kentucky. She was the fourth child of 27-year-old Tesla Tucker and 30-year-old Cage Rudd. By all outward appearances, she was a healthy baby girl, wide-eyed, soft-cheeked, and always reaching for faces with a curious gaze. Those who spent time around her in those early weeks described her as unusually bright for her age. She responded to sounds, smiled often, and shared a visible bond with her older siblings. They called her Smiley. It was the kind of nickname that stuck because it simply fit. But from the moment she entered the world, there were serious concerns. Concerns that should have led to immediate protection. Miya's umbilical cord, collected at birth as standard medical procedure, tested positive for methamphetamine. That single result triggered a mandatory report to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services in Kentucky, a system designed to flag substance exposure in newborns. Under normal circumstances, this would have led to a full review of the parent's home life, a possible removal of custody, or, at the very least, urgent monitoring. Instead, Miya went home with her parents. Both Tesla and Cage had long histories with law enforcement. Court documents from previous years showed repeat charges ranging from drug possession to resisting arrest. Records indicated that their 3 other children had already been involved in prior child welfare cases. Yet none of this stopped them from taking Miya home within days of her birth. Sources familiar with the case confirmed that caseworkers were aware of the family's background, but for reasons that remain under investigation, the case never escalated. No emergency custody hearing was scheduled, no judge was petitioned for removal, and although a file had been opened, there was no indication that law enforcement had been contacted about the meth-positive test. Family members noticed early signs of concern. Some had offered to help, others had voiced quiet doubts, but nothing concrete was done. Miya remained in the home under the care of parents already known to state agencies. As weeks passed, Miya's early moments were lived largely out of public view. Her photos weren't posted regularly. There were no doctor's visits logged beyond the standard newborn checkups. No daycare, no church nursery, no community touchpoint. Miya existed within the walls of that house, safe only in theory. Those early days mattered. They were windows of opportunity when someone, anyone, could have stepped in, but that opportunity was missed. Miya was never declared missing. No formal wellness checks were requested, and no follow-up actions were taken in response to the positive test result. What should have triggered immediate protection simply faded into administrative silence. And in that silence, an infant girl named Smiley remained in the care of people who were never ready to raise her. The system didn't fail all at once. It failed slowly, quietly, with every unopened file, every missed knock, every assumption that someone else would take responsibility. Miya was here. She was known. She was reachable. And from day one, she was already slipping through the cracks. The network surrounding Miya Rudd was more than just a family. It was a complex web of individuals with overlapping histories, fractured loyalties, and recurring contact with the legal system. Each connection carried its own weight, and together they formed an environment where accountability was difficult to enforce and easy to avoid. At the center were her parents, Tesla Tucker and Cage Rudd. Both had lengthy records that included multiple encounters with law enforcement over a span of years. Court records and previous reports revealed a pattern of instability. Their names had appeared in files tied to prior custody cases, failed compliance with court orders, and repeated concerns related to their capacity to provide a safe home environment. These concerns weren't theoretical. They were documented and known. But Miya's situation wasn't just shaped by her parents. Her immediate circle extended to several others, each with their own legal history and role in what would later unravel. Ricky Smith, Miya's paternal grandfather, had a criminal record stretching back decades. He had been convicted on prior felony charges and had served time. Despite this, he remained an active presence in the household. Billy Smith, the paternal grandmother, had been involved in a domestic dispute less than a year before Miya was born. A warrant tied to that case was still active when the investigation into Miya's disappearance began. On the maternal side, Talitha Tucker, Tesla's mother, was initially granted custody of Miya's 3 older siblings. That arrangement, made by family court, was meant to protect the children while their parents underwent supervision and potential rehabilitation. But court documents later revealed that Talitha had violated those orders, returning the children to Tesla and Cage without authorization. She also provided them with resources to avoid law enforcement contact, including funds and transportation. These actions led to charges of hindering prosecution and violations related to her custodial responsibilities. David Tucker, Miya's maternal grandfather, was arrested during the broader investigation. His charges were unrelated to the core case, but contributed to the overall picture of instability and legal entanglement within the extended family. Brody Payne, a known associate and close friend of Tesla and Cage, lived in the home and had a background tied to controlled substance distribution. Authorities later confirmed that Brody was under active surveillance related to a broader federal drug operation during the same time Miya was unaccounted for. Timothy Roach, another associate connected to the household, was arrested during a law enforcement operation for possession of a controlled substance that had not been prescribed. All of these individuals had direct or indirect access to the home where Miya lived. They moved in and out of a shared space that had become known among local officers for its repeated activity. Records would later show that, despite their presence and prior records, none of them alerted authorities about Miya's status. Perhaps the most crucial and troubling fact is this: Miya's siblings had previously been removed from the household. Agencies had already determined that the environment posed a risk to the older children. And yet, Miya was never removed. She remained. That decision, whether by oversight, delay, or lack of escalation, left the youngest and most vulnerable child in a setting that had already been flagged. The structure surrounding Miya was not hidden. It was known, mapped, and previously acted upon, but action stopped short of full intervention. It was a web of familiarity, past reports, and active cases, and it was this web that shaped the conditions of Miya's short life, one where visibility did not translate into protection and connection did not result in care. The warnings were early, and they were clearly documented. When Miya Rudd was born, routine hospital testing produced results that required an immediate report to Kentucky's Cabinet for Health and Family Services. A case file was opened. The circumstances should have sparked a coordinated response from both child welfare personnel and, at a minimum, consultation with law enforcement. Instead, the initial action stopped short of what policy would typically require in high-risk. Internal documentation later revealed that while the report was received and logged, there was no referral made to external investigators, no emergency court filings were initiated, and no alternative placement for Miya was considered at the time. In the following weeks, home visits were scheduled, but many were either missed or marked incomplete. Case notes showed gaps in follow-up and, in several instances, interactions that weren't documented beyond brief mention. Attempts to verify Miya's well-being appeared to stall, even as other members of the household had prior histories known to the agency. There were also missed opportunities to link known individuals in the residence to ongoing investigations in separate cases. While names of household members were recorded, those entries were not cross-checked with active legal matters, a procedural lapse that meant key connections between ongoing enforcement concerns and Miya's living conditions went unrecognized. Further complicating oversight were actions or inactions taken by extended family members. Individuals who were aware of prior warnings did not intervene. Some provided assistance to help Miya's parents avoid additional scrutiny, and others remained silent altogether. While the motivations remain unclear, the outcome was the same: limited visibility, reduced accountability, and no corrective intervention. What unfolded was not the result of one decision. It was a chain of incomplete steps, delayed actions, and missed coordination across departments. One early alert became lost in a system where responses varied based on workload, interpretation, or incomplete follow-through. Hospital report followed by an open file. Missed check-ins, unverified household occupants, gaps in documentation, a lack of immediate escalation. Each point, taken alone, might not have signaled the need for emergency action, but together they formed a blueprint of risk. This was not a case of system denial, it was system inertia. Policies designed to move quickly stalled at the administrative level. Protective processes that required momentum lost it in fragmented execution. By the time outside agencies became fully involved, the timeline for proactive intervention had long passed. What followed was no longer about safeguarding. It was about retracing missed opportunities. And, in that timeline, the most urgent question emerged. How many warnings does it take before action is finally taken? What ultimately led law enforcement to the home wasn't a missing child report. It wasn't a wellness call. It was a federal investigation, one that had nothing to do with Miya Rudd at all. In early June 2024, investigators with the United States Postal Inspection Service began flagging suspicious packages moving through a distribution line in Kentucky. The parcels were part of a wider federal operation known as Operation Summer Heat, targeting interstate narcotics trafficking through postal routes. Two names stood out in the logs: Tesla Tucker and Brody Payne. Brody Payne had already been under surveillance. Authorities had connected him to multiple high-risk shipments that were part of broader drug activity in the region. When a delivery linked to his name surfaced again, this time with ties to a residential address in Reynolds Station, law enforcement acted. On June 5, 2024, a coordinated task force, including local deputies and federal agents, executed a search warrant at the residence. The mission was focused and routine: enter, secure, collect evidence. At that point, no one in law enforcement had voiced concerns about a missing infant. There had been no alerts issued, no urgent flags raised by Child Protection Services. What officers found inside shifted everything. The home was densely packed with clutter, and the conditions immediately raised concerns. Officers documented what they observed during the sweep: residue, open containers, and materials commonly associated with substance preparation, all found within close range of an infant's sleeping area. A crib was located, still assembled. Personal items and infant supplies were present, but there was no child in sight. When questioned, Tesla Tucker and Cage Rudd gave a short, flat answer: CPS already took her. It was a claim stated without emotion, without elaboration. But it didn't sit right with the officers at the scene. The task force paused the search to confirm that statement with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. A call was placed. Records were pulled. The answer came back quickly: no. There was no active custody transfer, no pickup order, no documentation that Miya had ever been removed from the home. That contradiction changed the scope of the investigation instantly. What began as a drug case now carried another weight entirely: a question of an unaccounted child, one who should have been documented in the system but wasn't. From that point on, the inquiry deepened. Detectives began coordinating directly with both state and federal agencies, not just about the packages, but about a baby no one had seen in weeks. The original goal had been to shut down a suspected trafficking point. Instead, investigators left the property that day with more questions than answers. Where was Miya? Why had no one followed up? And how had a child gone so completely untracked? For the first time, law enforcement began treating this not just as a case of narcotics, but as something else entirely. Something that needed answers fast. The investigation took a sharp turn when a single claim collapsed. During the initial search of the home on June 5, 2024, Tesla Tucker and Cage Rudd told officers that child protection workers had already taken Miya. The statement was simple, said without emotion. But when officials followed up and found no record to support that claim, it triggered a deeper inquiry. That was the moment everything shifted, because now the question wasn't about controlled items. It was about a young child whose status could not be confirmed by any agency. Miya Rudd had not been seen by any verified third party since late April. There were no recent visits documented, no medical checkups recorded, and no one outside the household had physically laid eyes on her in weeks. She had quietly slipped out of view without setting off the alerts that usually follow. Investigators returned to the residence, now focused on a very different objective. The same rooms were re-examined, Conversations were reopened, but the answers were inconsistent. Meanwhile, in the background, Miya's aunt, Alexis, was growing increasingly concerned. She had been hearing conflicting stories from multiple relatives, and none of them lined up. One day it was one explanation, the next day something else. There were no pictures, no video updates, and no direct contact with Miya herself. Alexis knew something was wrong. She took action and requested a welfare check. That call made its way to the local sheriff's department. Alexis explained clearly that she hadn't seen or heard from Miya in over a month, and she wasn't the only one asking questions. When law enforcement followed up, they found that no agency had a record of Miya being placed into care. There were no court filings, no active custody documents, no visit logs. It was as if Miya had vanished from every system that was supposed to track her. Investigators were now officially treating this as more than a routine matter. With the information they had gathered, officers returned to the house again. They were no longer just looking to verify compliance. They were looking for answers. Tesla and Cage could not produce a single document to support their earlier claim. Their explanations stayed the same, but there was nothing to back it up. Each new question uncovered deeper inconsistency. When authorities reviewed case files from state agencies, the gaps became impossible to ignore. The last recorded interaction related to Miya Rudd was weeks old. No follow-up, no confirmation of her condition, no report from any field officer confirming visual contact. The silence now had weight. This wasn't an error in paperwork. This wasn't a clerical delay. This was a missing child with no official record of removal and no verified sighting in over a month. The original operation had begun with federal oversight of postal activity, but in its aftermath, the real urgency centered on a question no one could yet answer. Where was Miya Rudd? On June 14, 2024, marked a turning point in a case that had until then been surrounded by silence, conflicting statements, and missing documentation. At this stage, law enforcement had already conducted preliminary searches, questioned family members, and verified that no legitimate government agency had custody of Miya Rudd. She hadn't been seen in weeks. What had started as a drug investigation had now evolved into something far more urgent, a suspected missing child case with no witnesses and no credible trail. That day, investigators returned to the Reynolds Station property with renewed purpose. This wasn't just another search, it was a targeted operation involving a team trained to recover the most delicate and difficult forms of evidence. Included in this second wave of search personnel were cadaver dogs, specially trained to detect human scent even under concealment, debris, or in poor environmental conditions. As they moved through the property, each room was examined with fresh eyes. The home, described in court filings as cluttered and in disrepair, contained numerous areas that had not been thoroughly processed during the earlier drug search. Unlike the first visit, when officers were primarily focused on evidence of narcotics distribution, this time they were methodically checking every square foot for signs of human presence. It wasn't long before attention shifted to a back room, where items had been piled haphazardly. Among them, clothing, old boxes, broken household items, and one black duffel bag, zipped and pushed under a stack of miscellaneous debris. The dog's behavior changed instantly near the bag. Officers moved in and unzipped the bag. Inside, they discovered what they had feared from the moment Tesla Tucker and Cage Rudd failed to produce any CPS paperwork: the body of a small child, later confirmed to be 8-month-old Miya Rudd. She had been there the entire time. According to law enforcement statements, Miya was found fully clothed, and wrapped in a manner that suggested concealment rather than burial. The bag itself had been zipped shut, wedged behind junk, and left undisturbed. The condition of her body indicated that she had been there for an extended period. The decomposition, though not described in official detail for the public, was advanced, complicating efforts to determine an exact timeline or physical cause of death. Following the discovery, the home was immediately secured and treated as a major crime scene. Kentucky State Police crime scene units were dispatched. Forensics experts documented the scene through photographs, video, and detailed evidence logs. Items surrounding the duffel bag, including drug paraphernalia found nearby, were bagged and cataloged. The entire room was cleared for laboratory analysis. Miya's body was then transported to the Kentucky State Medical Examiner's office in Louisville for a full autopsy. The results confirmed that the child was Miya, but beyond identification, the medical report introduced even more painful questions. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of methamphetamine in her system, a drug her parents were both known to use and had been linked to through the initial drug trafficking investigation. Despite this, the official cause of death was listed as undetermined, largely due to the level of decomposition, which made it impossible to rule definitively on whether her passing was due to intentional harm, overdose, neglect, or environmental exposure. The autopsy noted no immediately apparent signs of physical trauma. There were no broken bones, no visible blunt force injuries, and no sharp wounds. But investigators were quick to note the absence of visible trauma did not rule out criminal liability. It only meant that medical science couldn't close the case on its own. Other evidence, environmental conditions, witness statements, behavioral patterns, and forensic context would need to be used to build the full picture. In follow-up statements, law enforcement officers expressed frustration and heartbreak. Miya had been inside the house the entire time. For more than a month, she lay in a bag while her parents continued living in the same space, telling friends, relatives, and even law enforcement that CPS had taken her. The most jarring realization was this: no one had been looking for her. There had been no Amber Alert, no statewide missing child bulletin, not even an informal social media campaign by relatives. Because the story Tesla and Cage told, that she'd been removed by child services, was taken at face value by everyone who asked. That lie delayed every step of the investigation. Only after Miya's aunt Alexis Rudd pushed for a welfare check did law enforcement begin digging deeper. When the Cabinet for Health and Family Services confirmed they had no record of Miya's removal, detectives knew something wasn't right. But even then, days passed before enough cause was established to bring in the cadaver dogs and carry out a full forensic sweep. In hindsight, multiple opportunities to find Miya sooner had been missed. A CPS report filed at her birth had flagged drug exposure. Her siblings had already been removed from the home due to similar concerns. And yet Miya remained, largely unmonitored, in a household known to have active substance abuse issues, repeated police contacts, and individuals with criminal records. The silence surrounding Miya's disappearance wasn't just inside the house. It extended outward, into the systems designed to protect children like her. Caseworkers, mandated reporters, neighbors, even extended family. No one sounded the alarm loudly enough, and when they did, it was already too late. In that black duffel bag, investigators found not only Miya, but the result of a failure that had rippled across multiple layers of oversight. A baby who should have been checked on. A baby whose safety had once been a matter of official concern. A baby who had quietly disappeared while systems argued over jurisdiction and adults avoided responsibility. What began as a search for narcotics ended in a revelation, not just about one family, but about an infrastructure that missed every sign. This moment would become the center of the case, the fulcrum on which legal consequences would pivot, and the moment public outrage would begin to rise. The discovery inside the home on June 14, 2024, brought a swift and heavy legal response. Within hours of confirming Miya Rudd's identity, the Daviess County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Kentucky State Police and other agencies, began issuing arrest warrants for nearly every adult who had either lived in the home or played a role in Mia's disappearance and concealment. At the center of it all were Tesla Tucker and Cage Rudd, Mia's biological parents. From the beginning of the investigation, their actions had raised suspicion, from giving false statements to authorities to delaying welfare checks, and to ultimately failing to provide any truthful explanation for their daughter's whereabouts. With the confirmation that Miya had been concealed inside the very house where they lived, prosecutors moved quickly. Tesla and Cage were arrested and charged with murder, criminal abuse, failure to report a child fatality, tampering with physical evidence, and abuse of a corpse. The charge of murder was supported in part by the toxicology findings, which confirmed the presence of methamphetamine in Mia's system, a fact that pointed to prolonged exposure in a hazardous environment. Investigators believed this exposure was not incidental but ongoing, and coupled with a failure to seek medical attention, it crossed the threshold into criminal culpability. Further complicating matters, Tesla and Cage had lied repeatedly throughout the investigation. On June 5th, they told detectives that CPS had taken Miya weeks prior, a claim that was entirely false. That statement delayed efforts to locate the child, and detectives argued it may have cost critical time in understanding what happened. But Tesla and Cage were not the only ones taken into custody. Ricky Smith, Mia's paternal grandfather, was also arrested. He had an extensive criminal history and had been living in the home at the time of Mia's disappearance. According to investigators, Ricky not only knew about Mia's fate, but took deliberate steps to hide it. He was charged with complicity to murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. Ricky's arrest came shortly after forensics linked him to the area of the house where Miya was concealed, and investigators allege that he played a role in helping move and hide the duffel bag where she was found. Brody Payne, a family associate known to law enforcement through Operation Summer Heat, had also been living in the home. Payne had already been under federal investigation for male-based drug trafficking, but the discovery of Miya shifted his legal exposure dramatically. Authorities found Payne had continued to live in the residence even after Mia's disappearance. With knowledge of what had happened, he was charged with criminal facilitation, evidence tampering, and drug trafficking. While not charged directly with murder, Payne's presence in the home and alleged failure to report the situation became central to the case's larger narrative. On the maternal side, Talitha of Mia's 3 older siblings, but she had violated a series in multiple child welfare reports filed in the months before Mia's disappearance. Timothy L. Roach, another associate who was present during some of the early home visits, was arrested for possession of unprescribed Suboxone during the initial investigation. While his involvement was tangential, it illustrated the environment law enforcement described as deeply compromised by substance abuse and criminal behavior. By mid-June 2024, all 8 individuals had been processed into custody. Arraignments began in quick succession. Each suspect was brought before a judge, and the charges were read publicly. The prosecution argued that this was not a case of accidental oversight or simple neglect. It was a collective failure, supported by willful silence and active concealment. 2 judges would ultimately preside over different parts of the case. Judge Misty Miller oversaw the early detention hearings, and pretrial motions related to evidence suppression. Later, Judge Gregory Vincent took over the case due to the expected complexity and volume of testimony. Vincent's courtroom would become the primary venue for the consolidated proceedings that would follow. As of May 2025, pretrial proceedings remain underway. Some defendants have entered not guilty pleas. Others are still awaiting formal indictment by a grand jury. Prosecutors have expressed an intent to try Tesla and Cage jointly, citing overlapping evidence and witness testimony. Defense attorneys for both have filed motions requesting separate trials, citing potential prejudice and conflicting defense strategies. The legal fallout from Miya's case has extended far beyond a single household. Each arrest exposed another layer of the environment she was born into, one marked by instability, drug use, and repeated failure by those tasked with her care. The courtroom now serves as the place where those failures are being publicly unpacked. Whether justice will come in full remains uncertain. But one fact has already been established. What happened inside that home was not invisible. It was overlooked, dismissed, and delayed until it could no longer be ignored. In the aftermath of the investigation, the focus shifted from the individuals involved to the agencies tasked with preventing tragedies like this one. Kentucky State Auditor Allison Ball launched a formal inquiry into the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the agency responsible for overseeing child welfare. Her office had been investigating how cases were tracked, escalated, and resolved. But when she requested access to the state's child safety tracking system, her team was denied entry. That refusal sparked legal action. In mid-2024, Ball filed a lawsuit against the cabinet, arguing that transparency was essential for oversight. The goal wasn't to assign blame, but to ensure that critical warning signs wouldn't be ignored in the future. Under pressure, the cabinet reinstated access in September 2024. Auditors quickly uncovered missed opportunities. Records showed visits had been made, concerns had been logged, but steps that might have protected Miya Rudd were never taken. These findings helped shape House Bill 574, introduced by Rep. Myron Dossett. Known as Miya's Law, the legislation proposed three key reforms: giving oversight teams full access to case files, requiring better communication between child protection and law enforcement, and enforcing faster action when high-risk indicators are present. The bill passed with broad support. While no law can rewrite the past, Miya's Law stands as a promise to do better. Meanwhile, attention turned to Miya's surviving siblings, 3 young children who had once lived in the same home. Custody was awarded to Miya's aunt, Alexis Rudd, and her partner, John. Under their care, the children were enrolled in school, received support services, and began rebuilding their lives in a safer, more stable environment. They lost a sister, but not their future. In the aftermath of the investigation, something began to shift, not just in Kentucky but in states across the country. Miya's story wasn't just shared, it was studied. Advocates, social workers, and community leaders began asking a difficult but necessary question: what if this could happen here too? In response, a growing number of counties began reviewing their cross-agency coordination practices, ensuring local law enforcement had access to timely child welfare information. Schools in multiple districts incorporated new training protocols for identifying household instability and escalating concerns safely and confidentially. The ripple effect moved outward, from state lawmakers to parent-teacher associations, from caseworkers to policy reformers. What made this case so impactful was how quiet it had been. Not hidden in a remote cabin, not buried in red tape. It unfolded in a residential neighborhood where people came and went, where no alarm was raised until it was too late. That's the part that stayed with people, and that's what communities chose to change. Several family resource centers in the region introduced anonymous tip lines. Others launched public campaigns encouraging adults to speak up if something feels off, even if it's uncomfortable. This shift wasn't about suspicion. It was about connection, about recognizing that sometimes families under pressure need help, and sometimes a single voice can start the process of getting it. Educators were reminded to ask the quiet questions. Neighbors were encouraged to stay alert, not intrusive, and parents were given tools to talk with their children about trust, boundaries, and how to ask for help. Meanwhile, community organizations and youth advocates began creating toolkits for faith groups, clubs, and after-school programs, equipping adults with the confidence to recognize warning signs without waiting for official confirmation. All of this happened quietly, but powerfully, not through national mandates, but through local commitment. Because prevention isn't about predicting every outcome. It's about creating the kind of environment where secrecy can't thrive and where silence is no longer the default. Miya's name wasn't just spoken in sorrow. It was used in training sessions, written into outreach flyers, brought up in town halls where community members asked for better protections and meant it. That's the change that lasts. And that's why, before we end this documentary, we invite you to do one thing: stay aware. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, or a friend, your presence matters more than you think. If something doesn't feel right, don't dismiss it. Ask the question. Make the call. Stay involved. You don't need all the answers. You just need to care enough to act. Let's make sure that no child in any town goes unseen again. Thank you for watching and sharing in this documentary of Miya Rudd. I'll see you in the next video.